Okay, the first session is entitled, the first session that have a number of speakers is Heritage Buildings in a Green Commercial Context. And the first is Commercial Buildings and Climate Change, and it's going to be delivered by a duo of Natalie Wilde and Lindsay Walker. Natalie is the Director of Program Management at the Office of Climate Change in the Department of Environment and Resource Management. She's over 10 years of experience in the public service at local and state government levels, and prior to joining the Office of Climate Change, Natalie worked for the Department of Infrastructure and Planning, where she led a number of planning and built environment policy initiatives focusing on climate change. She currently oversees the development of the Premier's Council on Climate Change work agenda. Lindsay is the Director of Regulatory Reform, Building Codes Queensland in the Department of Infrastructure and Planning. He has qualifications in commerce and law, and prior to 2006 he practiced in the area of criminal law. I don't know why the transition then to land use development and that sort of thing, including 4 years with Crime and Misconduct Commission investigating major organised crime. Gets better. In 2006, Lindsay joined the then Office of Urban Management, where he directed a number of legislative reform projects. Lindsay is currently responsible for the implementation of the government's Sustainable Development Program for the built environment. Could you please welcome Natalie Wilde and Lindsay Walker?
Beg your pardon? Do you want me to set the presentation up? Okay. Thanks, Jim. Okay, so this afternoon Lindsay and I will be talking to you in relation to climate change and its impacts on the building regulation and policy. We'll also be talking about current built environment policy and regulation, and then I guess how commercial buildings can be improved to combat climate change. Okay. So, I guess climatic conditions are becoming increasingly clearer. The climate change projections for Queensland indicate an increased intensity of extreme rainfall events and prolonged drought in some locations that need to be these need to be considered when developing built environment policy. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPC, is increasingly certain about causes and advises that there is a greater than 90% chance that observed climate change is human-induced. On the 28th of October this year, the Minister for Climate Change and Sustainability, the Honourable Kate Jones, released the Queensland Government's What the Science is Telling Us 2010 publication. This was previously released in 2008, so this is an update of that publication. This publication outlines the latest developments in climate science and the potential impacts of climate change in Queensland. I guess in summary, the key findings include Queensland is getting hotter, and it's getting hotter than the global average. There's also a tendency for less rainfall, particularly in central and southern regions throughout winter and spring. There'll be an increase in extreme daily rainfall, particularly during summer and autumn. There's going to be more severe droughts occurring with increasing frequency. There'll also be more intense tropical cyclones, however the frequency of these will decrease. And of course there's going to be sea level, and I guess the science is also pointing to the fact that sea level is rising much faster than we'd originally anticipated. So I guess what does this mean for the built environment? What does this mean for human settlements and infrastructure? I guess these changes in climatic conditions will result in specific risks which may impact on the built environment, such as sea level rise will increase erosion and the risk of damage to coastal infrastructure. Cracking may occur as soils dry out from higher temperatures and reduced rainfall. This is a risk particularly for older buildings, so of obviously key interest to people in relation to heritage buildings. There's an increased risk of structural damage to buildings, which is expected, particularly as a result of increased cyclone activity and associated flooding. The degree of impact of the above-mentioned climatic changes will have on the built environment will vary depending on the vulnerability of buildings. A building's vulnerability varies depending on the age, construction, type materials, maintenance, and as such this may render some heritage buildings, especially older ones, particularly vulnerable. This graph dictates what will happen, I guess, if you see a 25% increase in peak gust as a result of cyclone, a 25% increase in wind speed occurring within cyclones. This will result in a 650% increase in building damage. So this would have significant implications, especially for those buildings that have any compromised structural integrity at this point. Hopefully this graph is familiar to a number of you. It's from the McKinsey & Co marginal abatement cost curve. I guess having the science confirm that Queensland's climate will change, it's important that the built environment policy and regulation be developed to respond to these changes and maximise opportunities to minimise climate change impacts. As you can see in this cost curve, it illustrates that the majority of negative cost emission reduction opportunities are available in the building sector, and these have commonly been referred to as low-hanging fruit. Negative cost abatement opportunities provide a net economic benefit with no net economic cost involved. These negative cost opportunities sit below the horizontal axis at the left-hand side of the graph, and the width of the bars along the horizontal axis represent the abatement potential in megatons of CO2 equivalent. Abatement opportunities can be seen in the light blue section of this graph, and they show that by 2030 a total of 60 megatons of carbon reduction opportunities can be found in the building sector, all at a low or negative cost. Significant opportunities include improving commercial air handling, air conditioning and improvements in lighting. So I guess the message is building's low-hanging fruit, and we certainly have got some room to move as far as gaining some energy efficiencies in there. However, as stated by McKinsey and the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, retrofitting is considerably more expensive than creating a new energy efficient building. So I guess the important message is to try and get it right from now on with new building code, and then do what we can in a cost-effective way to get energy efficiency measures, implemented within existing buildings. There are potentially long timeframes for return on investment in energy efficiency retrofitting, with up to 15 years to obtain a payback on the cost of upgrading a 2-star energy rating building to a 4-star rating. There's also the issue of developer versus tenant barriers. This is a factor that impacts on the uptake of energy efficiency and is an area that certainly requires further government policy development work. So what does all this mean? Where does it take us? I guess to effectively respond to what the science is telling us and ensure climate change impacts are minimised where possible, future built environment policy and regulation will need to focus on addressing physical risks to the built infrastructure, promoting energy efficiency technologies and developing better alignment with tenant and developer incentives. Developments at the federal level, such as the establishment of a carbon price and the development of an energy efficiency trading scheme, will also need to be considered in the policy and legislation development stages at the state government level. I'll now hand over to Lindsay to discuss in greater detail the built environment policy and legislation framework as it stands and potential opportunities for developments within it.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Jim and David, for the opportunity to come and talk to you guys today. I suppose what Natalie was getting to is that government has two issues here to deal with. The first one is adaptation. I mean, how do we make sure that our buildings are able to withstand the issues of climate change? And the second one is abatement. How do we make sure that our buildings can pick up on that energy efficiency that Natalie was talking about in terms of potential? Currently, the built form accounts for 25% of our energy requirements. And the issue we can do with the improving energy efficiency is to make a large hit into that space of that 12%. So what are we doing in Queensland? And I suppose I should, before I get it launching and talk about that, what I'm hoping to do today is talk to you about three things. One, what the Queensland Government's doing and what the Commonwealth Government's doing in this space, including the issue of mandatory disclosure that David talked about before. I'd like to give you a bit of an idea of what we're considering in terms of the built form and where we think we might be going next. And I'd like to finish up by just really quickly examining what that means in a heritage context for the building.